Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of the FCCI Cacao Academy. It is such an honor to be here again, invited to be moderator. My name is Lauren Heineck. Today we have with us Dr. Verina Ingram, who is joining us from Cameroon. She is an accomplished researcher and scholar who has done plentiful research around the world, and it is such a treat to have her joining us along with the co-collaborators of the project, Dr. Carla Martin of the Fine Cacao and Chocolate Institute, and Alyssa Jade McDonald-Bertel of Cacao Academy. And this is being pre-recorded for July 29th, 2020 release. This is, as I mentioned, the 6th of the series. You can go back and watch the previous episodes on the FCCI YouTube channel that are there with Spanish subtitles. In today's episode, we'll be spending a lot of time getting to know a digital farmer field school project in Sierra Leone. And we, again, will have Dr. Verina Ingram here to discuss all about that. I'll pass it over to her to mention a bit about her background and work, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Lauren. So I work with Wageningen University and with two groups, with the Wageningen Economic Research, which does practical applied research, in this case on value chains of different commodities, so including cocoa, and impact evaluation, so the effect of projects and interventions. And I'm also working with the Forest and Nature Conservation Group, which looks at more the policy and governance of forest areas and agroforest areas, so that also includes cocoa. I'm based in, as you said, in Cameroon at the moment with C4, so the Center for International Forest Research. And our work on cocoa.
Yay, our favorite product.
So we were asked, so within Wageningen we have different ways of conducting research, and one of them is called the Science Shop, and that is where we get questions from organizations, could be anywhere in the world, and they ask us, can you conduct a small project for us? And it has to be socially relevant. And we got a question from matchmakers and a consultancy called Jula Consultancy in Sierra Leone around the time of the Ebola crisis around West Africa. And they asked us, can you help us? They were having problems. They just started certifying cocoa farmers. Sierra Leone is one of the poorest and probably least well-known areas of West Africa that are producing cocoa, but they just had a program to help certify cocoa farmers with the idea of giving them or helping them get higher income for certified cocoa. And just as they were nearly finished with the certification, so it was like a certification with an attached project to help farmers understand best agricultural practices and to apply them, just as they wanted to get certified, Ebola hit, and that meant that no group training was allowed. So no more than, I think, 3 people at the time were allowed to come together. So that was an end to all farmer field school activities. So they said, can you help us come up with ways that we can still stay in touch with our farmers, maybe digitally, but we can at least get them to this step of being certified so that this season's cocoa isn't lost and just sold as conventional, but is still sold as certified. So we worked together with them on a project with a number of colleagues, Luce Bittervein, Rico Lee, Margriet Goris, who are all specialists in using different technologies, different medias, to get in contact with local farmers and to communicate with especially with farmers and small enterprises. And together we came up with the idea of what would be the suitable technologies and how could we implement these so that they were, or how could we design a pilot, because it was a prototype, and design it so it would be appropriate to farmers, not just in Sierra Leone, because the situation there is fairly similar to, I think, many other West African countries where you have poor infrastructure, poor communication, a lot of illiteracy, very basic mobile phone contact, for example. So in this kind of context, how could we use the technology available to share information? So not just giving, but also that farmers can ask questions, can learn. So from a kind of learning environment.
Excellent. I did just want to spend a moment discussing a little bit about maybe the geography or the demographic of the area, because we hear so much about cocoa in West Africa, and predominantly all that is mentioned is Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana. And knowing that this is obviously where the crisis was taking place at the time, but understanding the importance the role of cocoa plays in that country would be interesting to touch on for a moment as well.
Yeah. So cocoa is one of the cash crops in the country. So most of these cash crops were introduced in colonial times. So along with rubber, coffee, palm oil, it's mainly, again, a smallholder commodity that's grown. There's estimated around 13,000 smallholder farmers working in Sierra Leone. Mainly it's been sold as a, let's say, a low input, low tech cash crop by the farmers, usually in kind of mixed agroforestry systems and smallholders, so 1 to 2 hectare average. And again, it's in this tropical humid zone, the same area as Ivory Coast and Ghana, the big producers. Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts, Carla or Liz, before we move into some of the dynamics of the Digital Farmer Field School in Sierra Leone?
Yes, Verina, in the beginning, you mentioned that you work within your research. I heard from you policy, applied science, practical applications. Something that we are certainly seeing as an emerging trend is the reduction of silo-oriented creation and more about collaborative work. In your experience, why are you working across, or how is that efficient for you to be working across different sorts of orientations or cross sectors to achieve the goals that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, from a disciplinary perspective in this, it's we received a question asking for what kind of solutions can you offer, and I think there, coming from different perspectives, is really important to be able to think out of the box and say, here we have a kind of wicked problem people hadn't anticipated, although now we see similar problems with Corona, for example. So how can we come at this problem from different perspectives, and not only from our Western academic perspective, but also collaborating with partners. So for us, it was really important that we had working with Fairmatch, who was the intermediary that brought us from the Netherlands, with doula consultants, and also with the farmers organizations that doula consultants were working with. So doula are a local consultancy in Sierra Leone who have expertise in working with farmers, farmer cooperatives. So putting these together is really important. And then also from the perspective of sociologists, media specialists, communication technology specialists, governance and policy, because in the end, it's we took a kind of innovation communication perspective with the idea it's a pilot, but if it works, if it was seen as promising, it would need to be scaled up and implemented. So to do that, it meant also connecting between researchers. What are the implications of introducing this new technology, for example, with policymakers, confidentiality, but also connecting with policymakers in Sierra Leone, with buyers to see if they could support it, with the certification organizations. So Rainforest Alliance, OOTS, were very interested and very supportive also in thinking along with us, how could this kind of system be interesting for them as well as a tool that could help them upscale and certification and to reach farmers as well. So the different disciplinary aspects and the different partners, I think, are crucial. And that for us as a research organization, that we think in different ways, we work with different partners.
Yeah, thank you for that, Verina. I think it would be impossible to understate how much that model of work has inspired what we're imagining in our current work responding to COVID shutdowns and farmer training. I remember, when this paper that you wrote about the Digital Farmer Field School in Sierra Leone came out, how exciting it was to read about it, to understand the thought and care that went into planning and pulling together the project. And as soon as it became clear to us how much farmer training was being impacted by COVID-19 shutdowns, I'm sure you remember getting an email from me saying, please, I want to dive into every single resource that you might have. Liz was doing the same. We were emailing the paper to everyone that we knew, to people in the Dominican Republic, in Nicaragua, in Colombia, saying, fear not, someone has solved this problem with a pilot program that we can look to as a potential model that we can explore. And so I just wanted to kind of pinpoint that for everyone who's listening, that, there are lots of different examples of digital training, but this is one of the most unique in the world of cacao, and that has been done for people who are listening with such expertise, where you're taking academics who have deep level knowledge about how to understand places and do these kinds of things, and then matching them with all of the different stakeholders that you've just described. It's in many ways a kind of ideal setup for how to make something like this productive. So thank you for taking us through those details now.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think some of the, for us in developing the pilot, so I mean, first of all, to be very clear, it still is a pilot. We didn't get to a stage, also because of the situation with Ebola, that just as we'd got to the end of the project, then the country opened up, people could meet again. But it's let's say a pilot where we still think is very applicable. And what it also showed, I think, our experience was that the design and the development process is incredibly important, making it appropriate to the people who are the users and the beneficiaries. So there was a lot of investment in the interface between the technology and the users, and also what they wanted to get out of it. And as part of that, a lot of questions came, for example, can farmers, it was around training and certification, but a question that came back from the farmers during the development phase was, yeah, but we want to know about how we treat certain diseases. We want to know, what are these diseases? And also realizing there's a lot of knowledge amongst farmers. So that became part of the app, developing like, a function so that farmers could upload photos. Other farmers could have a look at them and say, that's borer or a swollen shoot, or and if they didn't know, then being able to pass it on to others within Jula, for example, to be able to say what is the disease and how could you treat it. So a range of different applications was developed. I think another challenge was this kind of balance between how professional should be the application and its usability and the costs, because it's something to take into the field. So how could we make sure that it's simple to use, it's functional, and also that the costs involved in it, that farmers would be willing to participate, so they would spend money on buying, airtime so that they could tap into it. So again, it had to be useful. And that was something as part of the design process that we looked at, about how can you build that into the design, this functionality, this usefulness.
Verina, would you walk through some of those components or what led to those decisions? So I know you had both offline and online capabilities, some of those elements.
Yeah, so part of the process, for example, was working with, we worked with a group of African students who were in Wageningen at the time. So we didn't have the inhibitions of working directly in the field. So we kind of made a similar model with a group of students who were our farmers, who came from a farming background. Some of them were Indonesian, some were African, that they tried out the app. And then once we've got, so far we tested it with our local partners in Sierra Leone, again, to see how they responded to how it developed. So for example, the gender context was something we realized was very important. So male farmers and female farmers responded very differently to ask questions, to provide information, depending on the figure. So it's in a cartoon figure. And we decided to have one female, one male, both representing different ethnicities and religions, because that's the reality in Sierra Leone, a mixture of Christian and Islam. So we needed people that all the farmers would feel comfortable with. When we were testing it, we realized that people did have preferences for the female trainer or the male trainer, for example, on the app. And that turned out to be very important in making the app approachable and usable, especially when it's a technology that not all farmers at that time were familiar with.
Verina, what I think is most remarkable about the program you and your colleagues created is how you entirely focused on the needs of the farmers. For example, taking into context gender and religion and usability. In our own research, Carla and I have found how little we can use tech terms like user-oriented needs or academic terms like participatory action, but in the end, to focus really this is this service culture, or this orientation that you have the goal to genuinely meet the farmers' needs, is missing very often, I would say, in agriculture development, public health, rural development programs. What led you to decide to truly focus exactly on the farmer and forget all of the other fluff of the organizations around so much?
Probably the setup of the project, because it came as a development orientated question. And I think then maybe that answers itself in that the reason why that is maybe forgotten is that certification comes very often from a perspective of how can we serve a market, how can we make a value chain transparent, and that's not always in the interests of the farmer. It doesn't always answer all the needs of a farmer. Maybe it might answer some, but not all of them. So I think the project design really helped that. Also because it was a very clear need given the context at the time. But I think, again, we're seeing the same kind of context now with discussions around living income, around COVID, about how is it affecting farmers, and not just how is it affecting the supply of cocoa or the quality of cocoa. And maybe I think also, given the link with these different partners as well, I think that also makes the focus, our partners were a kind of development orientated consultancy and organization rather than a trader or a certification organization or an association. So it also obviously affects how we responded in the project. So I think it's driving the demand for knowledge and research. Depends who's asking the question, as well as how it's being asked, yeah.
And I had a question about the functionality of the photos. You had mentioned earlier that they could use the tablet to take a shot of whether there was swollen shoot disease or whatever other disease might be found within the field. How did feedback then get back to the farmers? What was that communication link like?
Mm-hmm. So this was a functionality we didn't develop very far, but the idea was that farmers would be able to upload. They could also ring. So there was like this front office and a back office. So whichever mode farmers felt most comfortable with, and that was also part of the design, to give farmers different options. Sierra Leone, a lot of West Africa is a very verbal culture. So written doesn't work, and especially given high rates of illiteracy. So that meant calling someone, showing them pictures, which is also what would happen in a kind of classical farmer field school extension environment, that you would be taken to see a demonstration farm. They would realize, okay, this is a certain disease, this is how you treat it. Now we had to try and do the same with upload a photo. Someone would, you know, in theory, phone back and say, okay, it's this disease or this pest. These are the different options you have to treat it. And that was also part then linked to the training on good agricultural practices, where they'd already had this training on how can you treat certain pests and diseases, what are the different options, including what are the licensed chemicals, agrochemicals to treat them, for example. So I think a key message here is kind of a range of options also to suit farmer needs. And maybe that's also something I think we realize from certification in general, that some of the best agricultural practices that are part of all the training programs for certification, still we don't always see them being applied because farmers aren't understanding completely. So there's an idea that applying pesticides or chemicals is always good, right? No matter what time of year or how it's done, or the quantity. It's like, if you have money, apply, which isn't always. So the finesse of training on good agricultural practices, and also the need for farmers to discuss also with agricultural specialists, for example. I think we saw how an app like this could be used to exchange this kind of information.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We are back for part 2 of episode 6 of the FCCI Cacao Academy conversation series. What just happened there is we lost connection with Dr. Verina Ingram because she has been calling in from Cameroon. There's a thunderstorm coming, and obviously connectivity has been an issue, but no fear. I still have the co-creators of the project, Dr. Carla Martin and Alyssa J. McDonald-Bertel, with me to discuss in general how this has impacted their thoughts on what they're building. So we will just draw on Verina's work, and from here discuss a little bit about what some thoughts and ideas are. And I'd like to start from a place of a little bit of where we were discussing the functionalities and the format. So it happens to be in a tablet, and how people use touch screens. So Carla, I will pass it to you in terms of what you had to say about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So I think we've just had a perfect kind of case study of one of the challenges in implementing digital farmer trainings in places without, routinely stable internet connections. And Verina has herself experienced it. And it fed into what the team from Wageningen did when they designed the digital farmer field school for Sierra Leone. They knew that connections were either limited or non-existent in the regions where cacao farmers were working and where they would need to receive training. And so they knew that any option they had would have to allow for asynchronous learning, meaning that people did not need to be synchronously connected to, let's say, a streaming video, to an immediate, chat that can go back and forth using a data plan, because those were not realistic options. And so what they decided is that they would create an asynchronous method, which would be an app that had videos and other content loaded onto it, that could be used with or without connection, and that when people then had a connection, let's say they went to town and were able to hop on Wi-Fi or otherwise had some kind of access to a data plan, they would be able to either upload images that they had taken using the camera, or download information that was coming in from that back office that Verina described, which was information from field trainers giving them some feedback. So that's one possible way of addressing these kinds of challenges, and was one thing that really inspired us, because some of the places where we're working, Nicaragua in particular, have really limited connectivity in the areas where cacao farmers need to receive training. Beyond that, they looked very carefully at the conditions that farmers faced that might impact their engagement with technology. And this is the kind of thing that goes into responsible innovation that avoids problems down the line. They knew that cacao farmers on the whole were older in this population, and they reported having vision problems. So they immediately said, okay, if there's any kind of technology that we're going to use, it needs to be quite literally big enough that they can engage with it comfortably. And that meant that instead of providing people with, say, smaller sized smartphones, they provided them with larger sized tablets. And that allowed for a bigger screen so that they could better view the images. And it makes a lot of sense in any situation. We want to make sure that the technology is going to operate appropriately for the needs of the people that will be using it. They also knew that literacy was not always comfortable for these different cacao farmers, depending on what age they were, how much access to education that they had had. And of course, the situation in Sierra Leone is such that most people speak Creole rather than, say, English in rural areas, and they knew that they would have to choose to do everything in Creole using the right language. And this is, while it might sound obvious that one should learn in the language that one speaks, it is far from the case in post-colonial situations that people are usually educated in their mother tongue. And so they made two important decisions. One, the tablet would be set up in such a way that whether or not someone was a comfortable reader, they would be able to click on things like images that were very clear icons that made sense for what they represented. And then two, that any dialogue or any subtitles that were linked with the videos or the other training materials that were on that tablet would be using the Creole language. So those are some of the things that just stood out to me as, these are really bare minimum correct pedagogy, but that had been implemented with such care and based on correct evidence for what these cacao farmers would need in order to access that information successfully.
Certainly, yeah, to be able to consider what might be replicable for your own project is amazing to have those points. And Liz, you had mentioned that there was something that struck you as being a pivotal piece that is monitoring systems or evaluation purposes.
Absolutely. It's exactly what Carla has just described here. Carla described the questions that the researchers and the team and the farmers had together, their decision points, the reasons why they chose certain paths, like a tablet, not an iPhone, and this language and this gender. It is this level of documentation about methodology, reasoning, facts, surprises, failures, this level of communication about the project and how well it worked and what the metrics of success were defined. Impact harvesting, for example, when Verina first introduced herself on this discussion, she explained to us all how she works in a combination of applied science as well as developing better monitoring, evaluation, or impact harvesting work. And certainly I'm a fangirl of Wageningen in university because I believe them to be some of the leaders in the field, in the world, regarding agriculture and impact harvesting, looking at the multitude of multifactorials which impact the success of a program. As Carla mentioned before, if you understand that a farmer, for example, might have vision issues or challenges getting reliable energy to charge a device, well, then you produce accordingly. And this is exactly what we have been missing in cacao farmer training and certainly in developmental agriculture for decades. My own personal research is exactly in the field of the effectiveness of cacao farmer training as defined by what they get in the end. And my personal highlight of the work from Wageningen and particularly this project was the meticulous care to noting these points. So we're reducing literally the work that they have done there, reduced reinvention of wheels, as Carla and I pick up great practices, and we have the luxury to be able to speak with their team and like-minded colleagues around the world. I think this is also an example of what many of us want to see about being the change of being multidisciplinary, of being cross-sectoral, of genuinely sharing information for the purpose of what we're trying to bring forward, and not being hoarding academics or intellectual property grabbers in companies. Certainly last week in our conversation with Anthony and Friedel, that request of please share your data and your transparency. And this, I would say, my highlight of the project is, even though it was a digital farmer field school, which in itself is a fantastic contribution to our market, their way is as valuable, and certainly the pavement that Carla and I are following forward.
Yes, and to be able to share with the audience a moment, just something I had gathered from the website for those who are not familiar with the university or research center. It is in the Netherlands, and it focuses specifically on the theme healthy food and living environment. At its core are the life sciences. So we will be sure, of course, to include some links and papers in which people can follow up to discover what else they have been working on in that field. We are continuing this conversation without having Dr. Verina Ingram with us, but encapsulating how impactful the project that she did was to both Carla and Liz. And I guess we could just leave with some final thoughts about how that has left a lasting impact and where things are going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. You know, we see in the project that was the Digital Farmer Field School in Sierra Leone, a really incredible use of different styles of learning, culturally appropriate, religiously attentive, attentive to issues of gender, race, ethnicity, more, that is really a kind of an ideal way to approach something like this. We also see different types of pedagogy, passive and active. So things like videos where you can kind of sit back and passively absorb the information, or things like submitting an image and providing some kind of critical thinking information about it that you will then receive feedback on. That's a much more active type of learning. And all of these things come together to create something very special. While she's not here with us, Loes Wittenveen, who was one of the leading researchers on this project, also explained the care that they took in designing the animated characters that played a role as instructors in all of this. So they have not only live action images, videos, and more, but also then animated images, which create an interesting type of distance in a learner. We can identify with different types of characters in different ways, depending on how comfortable we feel with them or more. And I was especially fascinated by that part of the project. Certainly, it takes a lot of time, a lot of development and design to develop an animated character like that, but there's enormous potential to explore these types of things more. And this has been done really widely in development work and education around the world. So let's stay tuned for hopefully more exploration of the possibilities of animation in this space. And then just finally, one of the things that was, I think, so special about this project is that all of the videos, all of the communication fits within the realm of peer training. So these were not videos that were a talking head of someone, you know, in the global north saying, and this is why you should do the following to get your organic certification. Rather, everything was created with this notion that people are learning from their peers. And that's fundamental to how Liz and I have designed FCCI Cacao Academy and how we're thinking about the build out of these different tools moving forward.
I'm just getting messages from Verina now, who says, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with the FCCI Cacao Academy and the team here for the opportunity to speak about the work. And she sends all the very, very best to everybody who's watching and might be interested. They're highly welcome to come and chat with her at any time.
Thank you both. And as mentioned, we will be sharing the links to the videos that you can see this project in action, and you can actually visualize the the language and the icons and the animation that was used. And it's really just quite a very informative and an interesting project that took place. And what a pleasure that we could have her for a short time today. And then we can also reflect on this later on. Certainly for me, what has stuck is that there's this idea of user experience and how we move through the world, not only in how we learn, but also just in general, what's important for us as individuals, and how to understand that is necessary in our movements. So again, we are grateful for you to have watched this episode, to have been a part, and we look forward to sharing another episode next week. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best.